We are officially live. Now, I don't want to put you on the spot, Anthony. I had my whole intro ready to go. Even though this is technically you're live, I wonder if you might let me just kind of brief kick it off, like it
Yeah,
were mine.
let's just hang out. Yeah, that would be great.
That's the goal, right? This is designed to be something that you can have on in the background, like a podcast, right? If you
Okay,
want, okay.
killer, killer. Love
And
that.
so this is Anthony, Anthony Lee Phillips. I've met him on Substack, and I've really appreciated getting to know him. But Anthony publishes the Substack publication Anthony Writes Fantasy, and his name is spelled exactly how you'd think Anthony Lee Phillips is spelled. Anthony Lee with two E's. And then, hey, Mercedes,
Hey, what's
bienvenido.
up, Mercedes?
Mercedes is a phenomenal romantasy author. I don't know, I don't mean to reduce you to romantasy if that's not what you define yourself as, but great romance author.
Yeah,
Anthony writes fantasy, and his name is Phillips with two L's. Phillips, right?
yeah, that's right.
So Anthony was one of the first people that I met on Substack, and I really like to get to know him. And there's just two things I want to mention. One of his works is called Moon Thread, and
Yeah.
it is the story of Nala, who is an orc. Actually, three things. One is that Anthony has helped me not become so much of an. Okay, I'm sorry, Mercedes. We'll get to that. We'll figure that out. Um, I'm sorry. Sorry. All right, we'll figure that out. But I'm reading about Nala, who is an orc. So the second thing is I had kind of the shall we say I had the human coded
Right.
idea of orcs. I saw them as kind of the snarling kind of creatures. I know that the Rings of Power has kind of done a little bit in that regard for the popular audience, right? And maybe
Yeah.
we can get into that. But I still kind of have this idea of orcs equals bad. But the third thing I'll say is one of my favorite lines of all time came from you, which is where I quoted this in my feed, which was, uh, and maybe you can correct me, but like now it took time to learn which shadows to ride. It
Yeah.
was like that line
Yeah.
to me was like it was like a world building. Oh, we're asking for a repeat, and I promise I'll turn it over to you, Anthony, because I want you to introduce yourself. But repeat back the name of the book. It's a publication on Substack. It's called Moon Thread. Moon Thread, one
Moon
word,
thread.
and you can find it. Actually, Anthony, why don't you go ahead and kick it off and let just remind people where they can find you.
Yeah, I mean, it's here on Substack, right? It's native, but I did get a domain so that when you type in anthonyleephillips.com, it just takes you to the first chapter. And then you can sort of follow the thread through there. Yeah, man, I really I didn't like plan to go the route of a bunch of orcs, but the whole, like when I was thinking about magic and I was really trying to figure out how the magic works in my world, right? And I obviously, you're a fantasy guy. I'm sure that you've seen the Brandon Sanderson lectures, right?
I'm a big Sanderson guy. My novel has two, not one, but two overlapping hard science according to the Sanderson paradigm. So I'll
Yeah.
stack my fantasy nerd bona fides up against anybody any day.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. So he I was like obsessed with his lectures, right? And while I was coming up, and one of his laws is costs, right? Like make your magic cost something, and it'll make it more interesting. And the problem solving gets better, the storytelling gets better. It just makes the story better. And I was thinking about costs, and uh I was like, what if humans can't do magic? Like, what if it's that DCC, that Dungeon Crawler Classics thing of like, if you do magic, it's like the unnatural thing, and you get fucked up. Like,
Mhm.
oh, wait, sorry, I curse a little bit.
I curse
But
all the time.
okay,
I'm one like Substack live away from like rolling up a blunt and smoking it on here. So
yeah,
that's just me. Anthony in no way is affiliated with me or my particular things. That's all me. But yeah.
but yeah, I was thinking about humans, and I was like, all right, well, what if when, like, let's say a human gets cured, okay, in a practical sense, a human gets cured. Well, what if it works too well and now you can no longer feel pain ever
Ooh.
again? And like these permanent mutation things of like, oh, you can use this crystal, but something really bad will happen. And you only learn that after you no longer have eyelids for the rest of your life or something like that, right?
Okay.
high cost magic. And then
Yeah.
I was thinking about what would that magic be, and I landed on emotion magic because I'm really into the Enneagram, the sort of your amygdala's personality type, like
Mhm.
in moments of stress, how
Well,
you
maybe if
react,
you don't mind,
you
maybe you can
know.
educate me because I've heard that word before, but I couldn't tell you what it means. Enneagram?
Yeah. Well, real quick with the story, so what I
Yeah.
ended up landing on was emotion magic,
Okay.
right? And so a soft magic that has hard consequences, if that makes sense. And like I don't know
Sounds
if
like a
you've ever
tough
read.
world to be in if you're a magic
It's a
user.
it's a tough world, and I don't know if you've read Firestarter by
You know what?
Stephen
I've watched the
King.
movie.
No,
Does
you
that
gotta read the
count?
book, man. That's my favorite Stephen King book, and that's my favorite. Yeah, it's Monkey's Paw Magic. Exactly right, Victrexer. And Firestarter is
It's my monkey's
yeah,
paw.
yeah. Firestarter is insane because like they have psychic powers, but the daughter, the Drew Barrymore character, she's a toddler with pyromancy. And so whenever she throws a tantrum, destruction reigns over the world, right? And that's emotion magic, man. And I was like, yeah, my characters are gonna have that. And so all the magic comes from emotions in my world, and all the emotion magic comes from orcs. Orcs were the first to have it, and humans are the only ones that don't. So they have all these stories and myths about why humans don't. You never really find out why, because it's archaeology, it's history, it's theorizing about the Babylonians and before. So that was sort of like how I landed on orcs. And in terms of like the snarling, like, oh, the orcs are evil. Like those orcs do exist in this world. It's just that that's not our starting place. We will meet the orcs who Aragorn wants to commit genocide on. Um, but like that's not the only orcish tribe on this continent. And something I tried, especially in my revisions of the festival chapters, I turned the one festival chapter into two, is I tried to really impress like this place is a very, very old portion of the world. It's like going to China.
Mm,
Like if you go from one province of China to another, things can be wildly different because that
yeah.
country is huge and it's old. And parts of it,
Never been, but I can imagine.
and I've never been either, but I've done a lot of research on like Chinese history
Mhm.
and like in martial arts and things like that. And in this world, magic is more like martial arts, where like a family has their magic and they don't actually share it with people. They don't, because that's how they stay alive. And sharing it with other people means that they know your weaknesses.
Ah, so it's kind of like, would that be when you say family? Do you mean maybe like the practitioners of a particular kind of martial arts, like a
Yeah.
dojo?
Well, yeah, like, but yeah, yes.
Yeah. I'm just
And
trying to
like,
understand. That's all.
no, of course. I say family style because it used to be like this is this family's branch of this particular martial arts. And like if you go into separate, like very specific areas of China, you will find like I studied Wing Chun for a long time, and that lineage had a lot of Crane. And
Okay.
they also had like a karate practitioner, which is also stems from Crane. But when you go to certain villages or certain families, like it used to be that um like a family would have their own flavor, their own soup of martial arts. So
The
like, oh,
secret
this,
recipe.
yeah, like this family, somebody learned tiger, and this other person, has a bunch of like cobra technique and qigong and like medicine. And then, like you go over to another village and they're just all this and like mostly weapons training. They might have like a little bit of like martial arts training, but mostly they just fight a bunch and make their own martial art. And it's kind of like that where it's like, well, it's just about survival. It's about survival, and rather than like the Orcish tribes in my world, rather than having technology, they had magic. And so
Mm,
they got really good at magic in different tribes all over the continent.
hmm. We had a quick question come up from Sahar. Welcome, Sahar.
Hey,
Uh,
what's up?
magic potion, which I'm taking to kind of mean you mentioned crystals earlier. Are there potions in this world?
Yeah, yeah, there are. I mean, there are potions and, there are lots of like liches. Like you said, it all sort of comes from emotion magic, but there is a whole branch that like sort of Breath of the Wild style, you find magical ingredients and you make shit out of it.
Reminds me of The
Um,
Witcher, kind of.
yeah, yeah, or The Witcher. I love the idea of like the elves being the elementals. Like it's not their elves and their elementals. It's like you have tree elves who are trees. You have magma elves whose skin is like volcanic rock and their blood is magma. And so like in that world, in that paradigm, you would also have people walking around with things growing out of them that they can then use as potions and stuff.
I didn't mean to smile if that was a bad thing. I just was
No,
like,
it was
things growing.
great.
If
It
there are
makes me
things growing
smile,
out of
man.
me, I want to know about them.
Yeah. Yeah, and, like, eventually I wanna get to this point where, I have this vision of, like, whatever my version of hobbits is gonna be, is, like, I imagine them as, like, druidic, but kind of white trash, and so, like, they're, like, the meth makers, and so they'll make potions out of
But
anything,
I love
and
that. I love that though.
you know, and, like, like, figuring out a way not I have all these ideas of, like, I wanna have the goblin mob in the storm city and then tell a bunch of gangster stories with goblins, but it'll obviously be like like in Medici era clothing, but telling the story of the departed,
So you
telling
got
the
the
story of the
Gringotts
Godfather.
going on, but they're
Y-
it's like but under the table. And
yeah,
shame on me because you just said something that made my ears perk all the way up, which is like The Departed but fantasy. So we need to talk just briefly about that.
about plot.
No, no, about how well, yes, but also I love The Departed, and
Yeah,
I didn't want to gloss over the fact that you're putting that in there. That's awesome. Please.
dude. Yeah, that I mean that the Departed blew my mind. I still haven't seen Infernal Affairs, which it's based on.
Mhm.
Um, but man, what a crazy story.
If you think
Crazy
about
story.
just like the architecture of the plot, it's almost like a I like Shakespeare, but it's like a badass Shakespeare. Like the
Yeah,
architecture of it is just like
it's so perfect. It's nested. It's like, you forget about a character and then they show up and then it's perfect. It's magnificent. And I really want to see because they Scorsese adapted it
mhm.
from a
The
what is
Hong
it?
Kong film. The
Yeah, Hong Kong film.
yeah,
Okay.
I have not seen it either, but I'm familiar with it.
I gotta see that, man, cause
Mhm.
like, oh, so good. I could rewatch that story 100 times. I love it.
Oh, I love it too. And I don't want to, we don't have to, I love plot as kind of a thing to talk about, but we don't have to do that because sometimes one is in danger of going into spoilers. But there was one thing I was interested in, and we can talk about that if you want. But one thing I want to do talk about is earlier on in the discussion, you mentioned how you didn't really plan to get involved with orcs as much. And
Yeah,
can you
early,
talk a little bit more
early.
about that?
Yeah, I mean, I've been working on this for not like a super long time, but 3.5 years. And most of that time has been trying to figure out systems for myself because that my grand vision, I've got 32 books planned. And so like
Is that
to
all?
for now, for
It's a lot.
now
I've
it's
got
all.
three, so you're beating
I
me.
well, and that's kind of the cool thing is it's not really like I don't know. But when I was trying to dream up the concepts, there was this idea of they're fighting the Death Knight because I had, played something and, a Death Knight character came up and I was like, damn, what a cool, like I'd heard it in Warcraft 3, but I didn't really hear it until I was playing. I think it was a Fire Emblem game, one of the new Fire Emblem games.
I love Warcraft 3.
And Warcraft 3 is really good. Yeah. I mean, with the twists and everything. Ugh,
I love how
dude.
they're not afraid to turn the golden boy into the ultimate evil.
Well, and they pulled it off,
And they did.
like they pulled it off and they really made him evil. Like my favorite thing about Kylo Ren was he was about to be the big bad guy and then they made him not the big bad guy. And I was like, "Come on, guys." Like,
Hmm.
oh,
I want to see a Star Wars series, and I was kind of hoping that the Acolyte would be this, but where we really get seduced by the dark side. Like we really understand why that person, um, goes over there. But real quick, while I've got a quick moment, welcome to all of our 13 viewers that have joined. Thank you so much. I wanted to say, throw us some hearts if we're doing well, but also right next to that heart button in the screen, you'll see one that's a square with an arrow coming up out of it. That's like
yeah.
the share button. If you press that, you can share it on Substack, and I'm going to do that right now. You may drop
Oh.
temporarily out of the call, but it's a great way to bring in some new people while you're on the call.
Do it.
So bear with me. I'm going to quick click it. And all I do is I just press this and then go to Substack for my share. I'm on an iPhone. And
Boom, boom,
then
bam.
bam. I'm not a Substack fanboy, but I've been pleasantly surprised by some of the features. One of my big bugaboos or my things right now is I wish we could be hosting this from a desktop. I
Yeah.
That's what I would like.
Yeah, that would be nice. That would be nice. I have a lot of like little gripes like that with Substack, you know. Mostly it's just that like it's really great from a writer's perspective. Like they figured out monetization early, and I'm very
Yes.
grateful for that. You know, like they
And
really put that.
analytics, like they can show you how to double down on things that are working and not waste your time on things that are not. Again, I'm
Yeah.
not a plant from Substack. You know, I'm not.
They're right. But yeah, I there are a lot of little things that I'm like, how do I report bugs? Because I've got a couple. You know.
I'm posting
Uh
directly to their LinkedIn feed and still have gotten nothing. So we'll see.
Yeah, I did a submit request and I talked to a bot for like 10 minutes. But
Yeah,
I don't
I
think I'm
don't.
gonna end up doing that again.
I'm over
But
that.
anyways, back to the fiction. But
Yes.
yeah, so I mean that's me in a nutshell, and that's the story. The story's come a long way and gone through a lot of iteration. Like I said, I mostly in the first years I was trying to find a system for myself because I have done other arts. You know, I'm a self-taught guitarist. I've been writing music for almost 20 years now, and you know my
Wow.
degree is in acting, and you know like I've learned a bunch of stuff and self-taught a bunch of stuff, and I sort of came into it. This is the first time I came into a craft knowing that I'm a systems guy, and so I just sort of went to work trying to find my system and like make, you know, sort of Frankenstein myself as like a writing system so that now when I have a scene in my head, I can sit down and outline it. If it takes longer than 15 minutes, you know, I'm still in the dreaming stage and I sort of restart. And if I can get the outline done, I can write the scene and then boom, I've got a scene in 2 hours, 3 hours,
Can
you
you
know.
talk a little bit more about you don't have to share your secret martial arts, but
And no,
if
no,
you
I have no secrets.
neither do I. I'm super transparent. At the end of the day, I'm a big believer that the artist and the creative is something kind of special that only humans really have, and you
Yeah,
have your own unique voice. And no matter what, even if even if like you say what you do and I copied it, something completely different is going to come out of it than
yeah,
you would. But I saw a picture that you posted of where it was kind of like a horseshoe almost.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I wonder if you can. I always worry I'm talking too much. I'm a talker. That's why I'm a writer.
No, no,
So
no.
I want you to take the floor now and maybe talk about your system. And then if I always want to bring it back to the fiction too, I always want to bring it back to the story. So
Same.
feel free to go that direction too.
You never have to apologize for talking too much. I'm about to rant your head off. So, and like, I really, you know, that's what I'm here for. That's what hanging out is.
Yeah, I kind of view this
um,
as us having a nice ginger beer
yeah.
over or coffee, whatever, what have you.
But yeah, like in terms of like what my system is, well, first of all, I have mantras, you know, and I like to start every time I talk about writing. I like to talk about my writing mantras because it's just having three things that you sort of tell yourself when you're stuck. That's like more useful than any paradigm, than any framework. It's just more useful to have something that, you know,
What are
like
those
I
three
sit.
things? Asking for a friend. Asking for a friend.
Yeah, well, art is about capturing the moment.
Okay.
That's all that I need to be successful as an artist. That's why, you know, like when your child makes a drawing and it has, you know, what people would say, "Oh, that has no merit." It's like it has a tremendous amount of merit because it's a child capturing a moment. It's a moment of development. It's, you know, it's so many things. You've captured that moment in that piece of art. When you have a band that releases a first album and it sounds like shit, but all the songs are fucking gold, like that is capturing a moment.
Hmm.
That's all you got to do. That is your only responsibility, right? And it's up to you to decide whether you capture the moment or not. It's not up to anybody else. So capture the moment. Tools, not rules. You know, and like my third thing changes a lot. So and it's nice to have something that's flexible. You know, I have all these little isms, all these aphorisms or whatever you want to call them that, you know, I sort of cycle through. I stories are about change, and change only happens under stress. Or I don't know, like it's like that Kurt Vonnegut thing of make your character want something. Even if it's just a cup of coffee, make them want something.
He's got a great
Um,
set of list of kind of
yeah.
mantras.
Yeah, his list is I mean, he is awesome. His video on story structure is incredible and funny.
I haven't seen it. I'll have to check that out.
It's great. He like breaks down story shapes in his typical dry fashion. But Slaughterhouse-Five is one of the greatest novels of all time and one of the best magic systems of all time. Um, but like I mine right now is one phrase at a time. I'm a huge Shakespeare nerd, and so I've just been like really fixating on this thing of like I think I have this theory that we think in phrases, and that's something that makes your words resonate more. That's something that makes your words get stuck in somebody's head. I wrote this thing at the end of Moonthread that I decided to put it in at the beginning. The
Hmm.
circle turns, the circle turns, the circle turns again. And, I was just thinking about phrases and like how, like if there was, I used to have a different sort of incantation, if you will, like at the beginning of Moonthread that was, I'll tell the tale as it's been told to me. Just listen close and picture purple trees. Um,
I
but then
love that.
after a and I still love that, but after a while I was like, I want something that for Nala's books I can have at the beginning and end of each book, the same way that Name of the Wind and Wise Man's Fear have that silence of three parts. It's the cut flower sound of a man who's waiting to die. Um, I wanted something like that, where it's like you can frame the story with this same thing, and you always know, all right, this is Nala's first trilogy, or this is the Nala saga stuff.
Hmm.
So,
No,
but
that's
yeah.
fantastic. I like so I'm interested too in thinking in systems. What do you mean by that?
Oh, I mean, um, like in this case, I mean outlining.
Okay.
I mean, coming to the floor with a framework or a template or a style in mind. Like I would consider if somebody is a romance writer, like and they're writing in a 20 book series and all the plots are the same, but different things are happening. You're being very creative. Like
Yeah.
there's so much creativity in doing, the act of writing, but for them, they're coming to it with this set of expectations. The system is already in place,
Hmm.
where they're like, all right, well, I know that I need a love interest and a rival and a this and a that and this, and they'll call it tropes. And I would say, oh, their system is tropes. Yeah,
Hmm.
organized thought. That's a great way to think about it, Sahar. And for
That I'm
me,
thinking of like Agatha Christie novels a little bit. You know.
huge.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, where's the red herring? Because like Agatha was the master of the red herrings, is what I hear. I haven't read any Agatha Christie, but like that's
Yeah.
word on the street is she's really good at red herrings and
And
making
those are
them not
very
be
those can
obvious.
be fun, mystery stuff or gumshoe detective, Raymond Chandler style novels. They've got a. I think that there's a fun and a joy in like Quentin Tarantino. I think does this really well. He pays a kind of homage to the pulp and grindhouse movies that
Yeah.
kept me like I want to now watch all these movies that are so cool. But anyway, yeah,
Yeah, totally. And so for me, like my systems, like when I was in acting school, I really love Daniel Day-Lewis. And I was like, I want to do that without having to do what he does. And maybe for some people they'll be like, that's, the whole magic of it, but that wasn't the magic of it for me. Like, the magic isn't knowing that he had to do that for a year and a half. The magic is I'm transported, he captured a moment. And so, like, I spent a lot of time trying to figure out, all right, well, what can my system be where I can drop in and drop out of it, drop in and snap out of a character, and
hmm
for writing that looks a lot like, all right, well, what, like I have my writing time organized. Hey, what's up, Angela? I have my writing time organized as like I've got idea time. And when I have ideas, that feeds into outline time. And outline time, which I call story time because a story is an outline for me.
yeah.
And then, story time yields an outline, which I then turn into pages in scene time. Idea, story, scene. And so, like, that's my system. And I spent a lot of time trying to figure out, well, what's my outlining like? And what is a story? I spent so long trying to figure out what people meant by story engine, and I got to the point where I just had to figure out what it meant for me and see if it worked. And it took a long time to figure out that it didn't, and it didn't, and it didn't, and then it did. So
Well, it is working. I was caught up in Nala. What would you, if you're, let's say we've got about 15 people on the call. Everybody is welcome
yay!
and thank you so much. I'm the author of AFL The Bastard, which is an epic adventure fantasy novel. I'm joined here by, I hope I can say, maybe at least a budding friend, Anthony Lee
Oh, for
Phillips,
sure.
who is the author of Moonthread and much else. But I was wondering, so what was I going to say? Um, it was something to do with all the new people that we had. But
Oh, Nala, and it's working,
yeah, so if
and
you were describing, like, let's say we wanted to take a character perspective to getting people interested in the novel, right? If you're like,
yeah,
okay, so Nala is this type of person, this is what she, this type of orc, this is what she wants to do, and this is kind of her history, and we're going to see her kind of go on a journey in insert vague thoughts there.
right. Okay, so first of all, it starts off in a place called Orkshire, and I was like, all right, well, like we know what Tolkien's orcs looked like. We know that
All too
Tolkien's
well.
orcs are bloodthirsty and evil and cannibalistic and all these horrible things, right? Um, but George Martin has this great quote of like when it says Aragorn got rid of all the orcs, it's like even the baby orcs and their little orcish cribbits, in their cribs. And I was like, I don't think I know of any children orcs. I'm sure they're out there in literature, but it was an interesting thought experiment. And then, like, my story is really, well, Moonthread at least is very much about empathy. Like, if there's a character who's not at all like me on the surface, but had the same feelings as me, how close do I feel to that character? And it turns out I feel very close to this person who's not my gender, not my species, has magic and I don't, like all these
You've
as
got some magic, Anthony.
well, but as many things as I could possibly make different. I was like, I wanna try to make that my hero. But the sort of larger scale of her life, the concept is like, what if you met Gandalf when he was Harry Potter's age, and that's Nala. It's just that she has shadow magic instead of fire magic.
Mhm.
And she's a girl, and she's an orc. Um, and, like, I mean, I was also inspired by I mentioned the new Star Wars movies, which I think I'm one of maybe 6 people in the world that enjoyed the new Star Wars movies.
Whoa.
Um,
Well, it's 7 now because although I did not like Rise of Skywalker very much, I will admit, I thought that Force Awakens and Last Jedi knocked it out of the park. I thought they were pitch perfect, and so yeah, you 7 now.
I love it. Welcome to the club. My favorite Star Wars moment is Rey reaching out and fighting for the ship, and then lightning comes out of her hands. And I talk about that
I
moment
get
all the
that.
time, dude. Like that moment, I was like, shit, she's a Palpatine. Like there's something so visceral about. We've seen exactly one character do that. I mean, if you've read the Star Wars books, then more. But like, I'm a
We
plebe,
won't get
man.
into the
You
extended
know,
universe versus canon. Yeah, no. We,
I'm a
we see
plebe,
one
and
character do that until it's Snoke. Snoke does also do that, but he's got a kind of different story altogether.
yeah. And so like, I enjoyed those movies much more than say Rogue One, or like we binge the whole series every once in a while, and I like those movies. And but I only bring this up because in The Last Jedi, one of my favorite things is that Rey and Kylo Ren are entangled. And that was a time when I
A
was looking
force
up a lot of
dyad, I've heard, is what it's called. A
yeah,
force dyad.
but I was looking up a lot of stuff about quantum entanglement, and which is real, which is
I
crazy.
was just like dyad. That was all. That was the extent of my research. Sounds like you
No,
did much better.
well, I happened to be looking up entanglement at the time, and I was like thinking a lot about magic systems and like what's my magic system going to be. And I was like, man, to be entangled to somebody like from a young age would be really weird. And especially if you never knew that person, that would be very, very strange and immersive, which is one of sort of my
And
pillars.
intimate, I think. Intimate.
Yeah. And like so starting off the book with that entanglement, with that immersive nightmare, I was really stoked when I finally had that idea of like I get to start with Bakura, who it used to be that the story was about Bakura, and then I was like, I can't actually start off this series. I could, but I didn't want to start off the series with a massacre. Because for a long time that was going to be the first chapter, and I was like, I this isn't the tone that I want. It's not the promise that I want to make. It's not actually showing you that orcs are varied, you know, and like truly varied. Not orcs are good. It's that orcs are different from each
If I
other.
may, and I know that
Uh-huh.
this might sound like a paradox, orcs are human in the sense that my view is, I see myself generally as an optimist, but human beings themselves, I don't view as innately good or bad. I view us as
Right.
human beings. Now, I know we're talking about orcs, but maybe that's a similar element to what you're talking about.
It is. That's
Yeah.
a huge thing, and it's like I wanted to show, and also like something that I believe about cultures is like a culture, you know, exists for a lot of different reasons. And in every culture, there are good reasons and bad reasons for everything that's going on. And so like the first part of the first book is slow because I'm like, I really want to give you the sense that like this is a culture, this is a place where things happen and people get ignored, and but there are lots of things that are there for a reason.
Well, there's a scene early on in Moonthread, or I think it was about chapter 7 or so, where Nala is sort of her. Since I've gotten on Substack, I've been kind of inundated with new reading material. So you're going to have to.
Oh
I'm going to
yeah.
have to apologize to you, but
No, you're good,
um,
dude.
there's a scene where Nala and her grandmother are kind of like in the stocks, or they're kind of up on like a like they're it's someone's done something wrong, and they're throwing like old rotted fruit and vegetables, right? Am I on the right track here?
No, but
No.
go on.
Anyway, it was a very cultural moment for me. It was where like Nala, I believe, was crying because she was seeing all of the people that she'd known her entire life throwing rotten tomatoes and stuff at her family.
I think I know what you're talking about, though. I think I know it's like a chapter called Orc Riot, right? Um,
Potentially.
if that, and because like
And I'm sorry for
she,
butchering it. I guess I
no, like I really do mean it. You don't have to apologize at all.
okay.
It's all good. Yeah, like there is a moment where I also wanted to show like Orkshire, the place where Nala's from, is the cradle of magic, right? And
Okay.
I wanted to show this in lots of different ways. You have all kinds of witches. You have the coin witch and the grain witch. And like in this culture, it's more common for women to have magic than men. So it's like a pretty rare thing for men to have magic, which is why orcish guys are like, warriors. Um and I had this idea of like what would their entertainment be like? And so I made the telling, and a telling is it's like a projected illusion. It's like, all right, I'm going to show you a movie, but you are inside of the movie. And so there's a chapter where her grandma is doing one of these tellings on this big, spike, the teller's spike in, or the teller's altar or whatever. I think I changed the name a bunch, but and she does a mass illusion, and she tells orcish myths, and they're how the gods came to be, and like the shadow goddess that comes back uh later on in the book. We hear a myth about her called Cape of Stars, where she's rescued by the orcs, and so she gives these daughters of hers, these shadow powers, these sorceries, emotion magic, and then that gets interrupted by Nala having a real vision. And she's got everybody's attention, and it's really, really, really powerful magic. So it's not just everybody around her, it's every orc alive sees this monster come and kill Bakura. And they're like, and there's
Bakura?
this Bakura, who's
Bakura,
this,
the character. Yeah.
yeah, this boy she dreams as, this boy she's been dreaming of. And and they have this big myth that I sort of planted in the earlier chapters of the demon returning. You know, there it's not just a demon, it's the demon
Okay.
is going to return and destroy the world. And they all think that, you know, this crowd, it's a bunch of refugees and then some pretty wealthy locals, and they start to have a riot because they're like, "Oh my God, she's gonna bring the demon back." And they all turn on her, and then she gets rescued. And so that's probably what you're thinking of, but
Yeah.
I should
These
have some
past
throw
2 months have
tomatoes.
been a blur.
Yeah, I imagine. Anyways, I've talked a long time. Why don't you talk about Ethel?
Well, I'm happy to, but I'd also, I have a bad habit of just, and I'm not apologizing. I just am a talker, and so I can talk all the time. But I'm hoping maybe you can help me stay on track because I struggle with that.
Oh, okay, sure.
So, real quick, AFL is was inspired by a book I read. I love fantasy, but I barely even got through much of Lord of the Rings. It's blasphemy, I know. All right, I love The Hobbit,
It's a
Silmarillion.
slow fucking book.
That's a book right there, and I mean like a capital BOOK book.
Yes.
And the Silmarillion, of course, is almost like a reference text to me, if you can imagine that. Like, I don't think I've sat down and read the Silmarillion all the way through, but like, I'd just be like, ah, yes, what exactly did Aulinde do? Like I need to kind of
Uh-huh.
do this in my thing. Great namer, great. Tolkien is Tolkien. I don't even need to
Yes.
get into that, but I actually read a lot of different kind of wide ranging things. I'm sure you do as well. You're talking about quantum entanglement, right? But one of the things that I read, it was just a certain time in my life, but it was about William the Conqueror. Are you familiar with that person?
I mean, a little bit, but
Hmm.
above the fold on Wikipedia.
Got it. Well, the main character whose name is Aethel, and is
Is
based
it
on.
AFL or AFL?
I say Aethel, but I'm kind of like I kind of want the world to decide a little
Okay,
bit. You know what I'm
okay.
saying? Like, so if you
Uh-huh.
hear me read it in my podcast and audiobooks, it's Aethel. But
Okay.
I took inspiration from Tolkien in making a kind of Ur language first. Kind of
Oh,
like a
cool.
right, like a I don't know if it's Quenya or Tengwar, which is like kind of the older of the two languages in Tolkien, but I kind of made like a Latin, right? For us in the Western world, right? A
Yeah.
Latin Greek kind of thing. And then so I'll build characters' names a lot of the time based on certain elements. So AFL is Ea, which means is a form that means beloved, and then servant is Thel. So
Hmm.
beloved servant, and there are only two things his mother ever gave him. So real quick, let's back up. William the
Yep.
Conqueror was a famous real person who lived around the year 1000. And in the year 1066, he alone, he with his trusted band of cutthroats and second sons and outlaws, banded together, crossed the English Channel, and took over England from the Norman, what was then a country essentially called Normandy. And that's where the similarities between this character and the real William the Conqueror end, because William the Conqueror, intelligent, ruthless, very competent. And I say that as like
Mm,
I don't mean that as like a bare minimum. The
right.
the Norman conquest of England is one of the great project management undertakings of all time. I'm not
Okay.
kidding. Now, it was a military exercise, don't get me wrong. They were over there fighting battles and putting down rebellions. But the sheer to this very day, well, who is it? I mean, I know Queen Elizabeth, but the or King Charles or King William, whoever the guy is, they still will say, you trace back your lineage to William the Conqueror because of how formative he was in establishing this Norman aristocracy over an Anglo-Saxon, or a Saxon, or Anglo, whatever. I don't mean to be whatever,
Right.
but like they basically were one of the very few successful situations where, and it was a brutal and horrible kind of thing in a lot of ways, but they took the Norman culture and put it on top. So we have it, you see it pop up in our real world in a lot of interesting ways. For instance, we call a cow a cow. I grew up in Germany partially, right? And so a cow is a Kuh, and then or a rind, and then you would say when you wanted to say a cow beef, you would say Rindfleisch, Rindfleisch, right? So
Hmm.
it's cow meat. But in English, we would never say that. We would say this is beef. And so that comes from the word bœuf, which is Norman French for a cow or the meat like that. But then, you have this other culture that's right alongside it that are saying things like cow, right? And, so they
Hmm.
would be saying like cow meat probably. But then you have the word forest, for instance. The word forest does not really enter the English language until the Norman conquest. The forest,
Hmm.
in its original sense, was the private hunting grounds of the king, right? No one was allowed to hunt there except for the king. That was a Norman innovation, if you can call it that, that they brought in, right? You have
Okay.
these words of the ruling class that kind of come in, and I love duality, dyads. I love duality.
Hmm.
There's a bunch of things going on, but I love the fact that the people that this is an American fantasy novel too. And what I mean
Hmm.
by that is my favorite Stephen King book and one of my favorite fantasy novels of all time is The Stand, which I view as a fully fantasy book. Dystopian, I understand, right? It's usually put in
Right.
science fiction, maybe spec fic or dystopian fiction, but it is fundamentally about a battle between otherworldly good and evil in a
Hmm.
grand cast of characters. That's an inspiration. So American fantasy, I'm American. You sound like you're either Canadian or American. And where are you from, based out of general terms, though, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, I'm American. I'm from Washington State.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I love the Pacific Northwest, although I've never been there. It's like my vibe. Cool, rainy, not too much of this sunshine stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I'm from the dry side, and then I went to college and lived my adult life in Seattle.
Very cool.
Yeah. And
Very cool.
then recently I moved over to the East Coast with my wife. So,
Oh,
yeah.
well, welcome to the East Coast. I'm down in North Carolina.
Nice.
Um, no, there was kind of a good point that I wanted to make. But the
American
similar
fantasy.
American. Okay, so I define that as fantasy with a frontier. A fantasy with a frontier. Now, frontiers are problematic, right? Because usually it involves some population getting displaced, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that is not, I'm not saying like, great, a frontier. It's Oregon Trail. We're all going out there and it's going to be fun
Right.
because it was not, right? There
Say
were,
hello to dysentery.
yeah, dysentery, you've got diphtheria, sorry.
Sorry about it.
I would always spend all my money on the guns and stuff and just shoot all that sort of stuff. But anyway, I was interested, and so the Second Crusade was a centerpiece for me, which is one of the more interesting and grand scale crusades. If you watch the movie Kingdom of Heaven by Ridley Scott, major touch point for me. It's like 3 hours long.
Long time ago. Long time ago. But I remember images in it.
Movies are a big thing for me, almost as much as books are. And if I want everyone, the characters in this book are described. I view it, talking about systems. I give myself like 3 to 4 max things physical about the characters that we know, right?
Okay.
I want people to be able to see when I talk about AFL versus EFL or AFL or whatever. You know, think about the Middle Ages, right? The Saint William is sometimes spelled Guillaume, which is the French, or spelled William. Sometimes it's spelled Willem. Sometimes it's spelled Will, period, to be like this. Sometimes it's
Yeah.
spelled
It was
W,
not standardized.
right?
Yeah.
There's kind of this. So if somebody wants to say AFL, go ahead. I just say AFL. But you've got, can you help me get back on track?
Yeah, yeah. You were talking about American fantasy and then frontiers and
Frontiers. But yeah, so a fantasy with a frontier and all the problems that I think come along with that sort of thing. So the Second Crusade, the Crusades kind of stuck out to me as the situation where you have this medieval Europe in a fantasy type environment, but you have a frontier. You have people that are able to
mm,
go from this very rigid feudal structure and kind of roll the dice. And so in this movie, The
yeah.
Kingdom of Heaven or Kingdom of Heaven, which I recommend a rewatch, if there's one thing that people have, like I said, there are only a couple of things that we know about each character physically, and I want to
Right.
keep it that way because I don't want people to. Some people they're described relative to one another as if the Terrans, right? Super original name, right? Terrans, but there was something about the word Terra, Tera. It was just like I liked it, and I needed to do it, even if it was just one letter removed from the Latin word for Terra, for Earth. but the Duchy of Terra exists within this thing, and so, but there's situations where like the Dastra Terrans, which are like a subculture of Terrans, are described as dustier than the Terrans.
Mm,
They're described as a little bit swarthier, right? Some are paler, right? You know, people from the north
right.
are a little bit pale. So you've got that element, right? Because I think that that's a part of humanity, and there's humans. These are human beings in here.
Yeah.
At the same time, though, there's no significance really attached to it, and it's more about like I want people if people want to imagine or if they feel like a character looks a certain kind of way, then that's I would love that. I think that that's part of what is the magic of everything. But you've got yeah. So what the characters look like,
Can you
Kingdom
remind
of
me,
Heaven.
is it's all like I remember I read like 6 chapters of it
Talking
all
about
in
a
one.
slow first chapter, it mine is.
I sort of shotgunned it, but that was a little while ago. And like what would you say like the premise like you said you've got 3 books in mind.
Yep.
What would you say is the premise of the trilogy and what would you say is the premise of the first book?
Trilogy's premise is the triumph of the people over an aristocracy. The whole thing is basically one big slave uprising and outbreak. Where the Red Rising science fiction series was one of the 3 big influences on AFL the Bastard.
Hmm.
We're going to learn more about this, but there is a very secret and there's a secret slave system even within the rigid hierarchy of this world that are being taken advantage of to deliver things that are kind of similar to some of the technologies in our own world.
Okay.
But they're doing this in a way that is oppressive to those people. The form of magic that's in my book, one of the forms of magic, is generally it's referred to as Revaingen, Rvaingen, and that means afflicted, sometimes haunted. So I was really it resonated with me when you talked about that because magic in my world is very systematized, but it's very soft in the way that like the Force in Star Wars is soft. I would describe soft the Star Wars world as a hard magic system, right? You know, there are costs to it, but at the same time, there are also, you know, it's also pretty easygoing, but at the same time, there are clear lines in the sand of like, it always bugs me when like some like Jedi all of a sudden like overpowers some super powerful Jedi that they never would have been able to because
Hmm.
like when Rey does I love the movies, don't get me wrong, but when Rey defeats Kylo Ren as easily as she does, I was kind of like, well, that kind of made me like, is Kylo Ren really that scary? Not that Rey is weak, but she's a youngling almost. You know, she's barely picked. She doesn't even have. She's borrowing. Anakin's lightsaber is the most well used lightsaber in the history of Star
Yeah.
Wars. That thing, he built that sucker well.
He
Um,
did.
but she's got this. She's got. I mean, and so I just imagine myself with a lightsaber against a trained Jedi. I would be gone. You know. So
Yeah.
I kind of like this idea of there being gradations of magic. I don't really get into the intelligence whatsoever in this world, but it's sort of like talent, I suppose. Like there are
Hmm.
people who are more talented than others. Then AFL is the main POV character, so he is particularly talented with a particularly dangerous and to himself and others form of magic. But the premise overall, 3 books. The first one is about the early life of William the Conqueror, and the situation, by the way, is William the Conqueror was an asshole. He sucked, and he was a violent on another one on another I almost said podcast, but on another live somebody was asking me, so was he kind of a backstabby kind of a guy? And I was like, no, he was a front stabby guy.
That's
He would
funny.
stab you from the front. But he was also illegitimate. His mother was a tanner's daughter, and this was
Hmm.
always used against or frequently used against him. But the first book is a civil war that breaks out when his father dies. This happens early in the novel when
Okay.
his father dies, and but he's kind of an Alfred the Great or a bookish. He's very cerebral and bookish and a thinker, but he's also an extremely competent fighter. His weaknesses are many, including an uncontrollable rage and resentment and a massive chip on his shoulder that causes him to act impetuously and put others' lives in danger when there would have been another way. At the same time, even at
So
the
like
age of
reckless, would you say?
reckless. He is desperate. So William the Conqueror was a bastard and he had to compensate and fight his way up. He is a testament to the medieval thing of there was a rudimentary kind of social mobility. Like William never did not have enough to eat.
Well, let's not talk about William. Let's talk about AFL. Let's talk about
AFL. So,
AFL.
okay, yeah. So it's him surviving the Civil War, and we'll see whether or not he prevails. But the second book is more of a Pocahontas style story where he is invading what is the equivalent of England, and is largely successful. But then, even though he's married, falls for the mysterious daughter of a king that's there.
Hmm.
And that's another area where he is very lacking, is that he does love, he is straight, he does love the women that he loves very much, but he's not a faithful husband. you know
Right.
he's
Okay.
not, you know
Reckless.
he's reckless, he's impetuous, he's selfish too. He has a massive
Yeah.
chip on his shoulder. And he's also very sad, and he is very, very hard on himself. The coolest thing about AFL is that he has a ghost that lives inside of his head. So
Hey.
her
Who's
name is
Ghost?
Sarah. Her name is Sarah Safina, and she is her father, their father's true daughter. She's ruthless, relentless, and brilliant, and she's the one that AFL gets a lot of his best ideas from. So Sarah Safina is a man of. So I suffer from some mental illnesses. One of them is obsessive compulsive disorder and things that are like negative thoughts. And
Hmm.
so I wanted to bring that into the magic system a little bit. And I wanted to make it a lot like X-Men, kind of tremendous powers, but at a very strong cost. People
Yeah,
get hurt and
visceral
injured,
cost. Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
so AFL has this phantom, and her appearance is variously described. She's kind of an otherworldly presence, but she's a manifestation of obsessive compulsive disorder and obsessive thoughts. But she's also a source of strength for him because she can see things that others can't. And she makes him one of the main reasons he's such a skilled fighter is really because she's like sitting on his shoulder, kind of like, okay, you're looking at his eyes. When you're sword fighting, you're always supposed to look at the eyes, I learned, not the sword. You look at the person's eyes to see where they're going. But he's looking at the eyes, and she's over here being like, his left foot is twitching. You need to get in there. Boom. Get it, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So he's super confident, competent, but he's not confident. And he's desperate to prove himself to a point where he really is reckless and impetuous. Case in point, the second part of the first book is called Under Siege, or The Ladies of the Kaleidoscope Keep. That's where his wife, his newlywed wife, who they haven't known each other very long, is forced to defend the entire capital city against his enemies that he's brought on by uh, taking on the duchy that he was never supposed to inherit. He basically says the Duke apparent is too young to rule, just a few years younger than you'd want to be. And so AFL says, yeah, I'm now the Duke. Deal with it. Like
Yep.
I'm gonna get back on everybody who was ever mean to me. He grew up a twin dual existence between his family's a little bit more well to do. His common family is a little bit more well to do than Williams was, but they are still they're brewers. They're very
Okay.
still low, and he spent his summers there, but would come over back to the castle in winter because for a long time his father does not have an heir, and they look exactly alike to the point where it's kind of a little bit of a nod to my dad and me because we sometimes get mistaken for one another. But that's kind of like the element there. But yeah, Sarek Safina and AFL are the centerpiece of it. If you've read his dark materials like Amber Spyglass or Golden Compass, those kinds of
Yeah. Yeah.
things, think Lyra Balakwa Pantalaimon or Pantalaim, like that kind of vibe, except
Pantaleimon.
she's
Yeah.
on the
Yeah.
inside, right? But sometimes she'll leave
Mm.
him. But she's she's the power behind the throne. But ultimately, she is AFL, just like obsessive compulsive disorder. You have these thoughts that come in and you feel like they have power. In my case, it manifested as a very particular fear of hell when I was growing up, going to hell, and that was going to happen to me. And so you he I just wanted to kind of take some of my pain and turn it into something interesting that potentially other people might relate to and see as a strength. And that
It's
is kind
beautiful.
of this Revangian idea. But it's important. No leader, no noble. They're treated as second class citizens at best. They're
Yeah.
in
Yeah. Yeah.
ghettos. A lot of inspiration was drawn by the horrendous treatment of the Jews throughout history, and
Mm-hmm.
some their treatment at best was that they had to live off by themselves and could not participate really in the activities of anybody. So that's where, like, almost lepers, right? They're over
Yeah.
there, right? But regardless, and sometimes they're outright purged and killed into genocide. It's awful. It's not a great. It's a horrible world. But at the same time, there's a universal kind of law, which is that no none of these people could ever rule. They're too crazy, like they're
Right.
insane, man or woman, doesn't matter. You can't have that. So a big moment is, and I'll just sort of put this in vague terms, is we may or may not discover that AFL does not even really know that he has this magical power and thinks he might just be a little wild. And that's the thing about OCD, is full well that these thoughts that come in are not real. There's no,
Mm.
full well this is like me tapping, this a certain number of times is not going to prevent me from doing X, Y, and Z, or this from happening to me. At the same
Right.
time, though, that's where that compulsion kind of comes in. You have
Mm.
to do it, right? And so he thinks he's just a little bit of an oddball. We may kind of find out that there's more to him than meets the eye from his common born mother that he may have inherited, other than his Dostrateran eyes and his a lovable band of cutthroat misfits that he rides around with, called the Bastards. Whether or not
Yeah.
they accept that when they find out and what happens, we'll see.
All right, so here's have you seen those video essays Michael Arndt did on story structure? He's the
Mm-mm.
guy who wrote Little Miss Sunshine. I'll
Ooh,
send
great movie.
you he has, and he also wrote Toy Story 3.
Mm.
And he has these two video essays, and each one's like an hour and a half long, where he just talks about the lessons he learned in writing these specific. Hey, what's up, the Black Knight?
Hey, Black
Uh,
Knight.
there are these specific they're awesome. They're really, really good. They're the best videos on story structure. But he talks in the Toy Story 3 video about ugly truth and how like every story is really about an ugly truth. And I heard this a couple years ago and I was like, that's it. That's it. I have this sort of like in my outlining system, the ugly truth is one of the axes that your character goes on in their journey. And it's like the first half of the story is denial of an ugly truth when you think you have a problem. And yeah, you think you have a problem and you're like, I'm just going to solve this problem. And at the midpoint, you do solve the problem and it creates another problem. And you learn that you don't have a problem, you have a dilemma and you have to pick a side on a dilemma. You don't get to solve justice versus mercy. You have to pick one
Mhm.
in some situations. And I was trying to, and that's an Alan Watt thing. Alan Watt, who wrote the 90-Day Novel, which is a great craft book.
Oh, I thought Alan Watts. I'm thinking of like the psychedelic guy, but no.
Yeah, that's a different guy, but
Yeah.
they have the same name. But if you look up like Alan Watt Film Courage, he has some excellent interviews on film courage, and his theory on story structure is just awesome. The 90-Day Novel really will get you get a novel written in 90 days if you just open it up every day and do the things. It's crazy.
Well,
Anyways,
I got some book store gift cards, so I know what I'm doing the rest of the afternoon.
it's really good. I wish it had a better title.
Yeah, it
But
does
like
sound
the
kind of gimmicky a little bit.
but the I mean, I'm just people call him the writer whisperer and there's a reason. But
Because I'm going through, so it's hard for me to. I'm big on promoting my book because I feel like no matter how good your work is, I think good work will out. I really do, but I
yeah,
need to pay my rent and I'd love to be able to do it with this. So I want to accelerate that process. But it's hard for me. Like, I wrote the first 30,000 words of this serial novel and it's out there now.
yep,
But
nice,
now I'm kind
congrats.
of shifting into growth mode and it'll be like probably a couple more weeks before we get back into the story. But yeah,
Yeah.
so that would
Oh,
actually still, that'd be a good way to get back into the writing process.
do you outline?
Oh, of course I do. I do, but I also very much like, so I'm a poet originally. I write poetry. One of my
Nice,
publications is just devoted to poetry.
nice,
And yeah, it's called Away with Words. If you guys are into that sort of thing, it's great. There's no any kind of, it's poems.
killer.
People weren't making money on poems back when people actually read poems. So don't worry. This is just fun for me to express, right? So I actually almost kind of write in poems. I wouldn't say that I write in meter and verse, although I do like some of the epics, like within the novel, the kind of in-world epic touch points that they all have.
Yeah.
Those are written in it, but I kind of write in these little, I would say probably about 600 to 800 max, 400 to 500 word bursts, right?
Okay.
And then it's like, imagine it kind of being put onto I don't write on index cards really, but like an index card here, index card there. And they're kind of
Yeah.
tied together, but that's kind of how I write. And I wonder if maybe by learning from you and Alan Watts, a better way to do that for
Alan
outlining.
Watt.
Yeah.
Alan Watt.
Watt.
But
Okay.
you'll find him. You'll find him. It'll be yeah, but yeah, like I at some point at a later date when we have like like a dedicated time, I can talk you through my outlining process. And I only bring that up because I think that you in particular would appreciate it and it would be useful for you. It's not useful for everybody. It's tools, not rules, right? It's one of my always mantras. Tools, not rules.
I would
And
welcome that. I really would. I'll take
you,
I'll
yeah.
think about that as something we can do in the future.
And like it's sort of based on the story circle that Dan Harmon has, but it's using a lot of Alan Watt terminology, and it also uses a lot of well, that I've heavily modified it. Like
I saw the picture. I'm excited to learn more.
there's Ellen Brock, who's a novel editor on YouTube. She has this whole series on story structure that kind of blew my mind. And so there's a lot of her stuff is in it too. And then framing images. But anyways, all this to say, ugly truth is at the heart of every story for me, every story that I build. And there's this idea that in the beginning, rather than saying want and need, you just rename it so that it's more visceral. And so you say, all right, there's some ugly truth in each book that AFL is in denial of because it's easier to be in denial of that. And if you can have that in the middle become like you can't deny it anymore, so that by the end, when he confronts it, it makes sense. Because if he realizes it and confronts it all in one moment, it very rarely feels organic. You can do it, you can pull it off, it's been done, but like it's why Freytag's pyramid is used when people analyze Shakespeare. Like in the middle of Hamlet, he kills Polonius, and he
Mhm.
realizes, he can't just kill. Well, I mean, really, I think that the midpoint is him choosing not to kill Claudius, and because he wants to damn him to hell forever. But all that to say, like in the middle, there should be like an ugly truth that can no longer be denied. That by the end, it's like I have to pick a side. I've got to pick a side of this dilemma. I can't pretend that I'm solving a problem. I'm going to create more problems. I just need to do what I think is right in the moment. And what I think is right is either A or B. It's either left or it's right. And I got to go now, you know? And so that was a build up to a question of like, do you think that there is an ugly truth that AFL is in denial of at the beginning of book one?
Absolutely. His ugly truth is Serexifina. Listen, real quick though, she is a character in her own right, and she is kind of a device, but at the same time, she is all him. She doesn't, there's
Hmm.
not a voice in his head. She is a kind of device to talk to him. And she is an ugly truth about his role and his destiny that he does not want to face, that we're going to find fleshed out over the course of the three novels. But his ugly truth are the sides of himself that she encourages, and his
Hmm.
struggle in a lot of the times is I'm ruthless and evil in so many ways and selfish in so many ways. And a
Hmm.
lot of that comes from Serexifina's encouragement, the devil on his shoulder, but really it's from him. And so when
Yeah.
he does things like sack a city, and he likes to think of himself as this good guy, he's doing the honorable thing, but we're going to see him doing some truly reprehensible things.
Hmm.
Like we're going to see him being very bad and not somebody you want to be around. And his ugly truth is the ugliness within himself. And I guess, his struggle would be, if I want to, like, is what I want to achieve even worthwhile? A, like, because I want to be the ruler of this, like, is that something really that I should be striving for? And then B, is how I'm going about it the right way to do it? The answer to those probably no for both fronts, but
Yeah.
you know, but as we're getting here toward an hour, I don't want to run out of steam. I've talked a little bit, you've talked a little bit. I wonder if maybe we can kind of close this out casually and then kind of go over some of the comments, and I can kind of look at these and see if anybody had questions and address those. And while I do that, please feel free to chime in and say what you need to say.
Yeah. Do you so who's your favorite poet?
My favorite poet is Hart Crane. He was an American romantic poet. Do you know him?
I know Heart Crane the Bridge.
Yes. How many
Yeah.
dawns chill from his rippling rest, the seagull's wings shall dip and pivot him over white rings of tumult, building high o'er the chain bay waters of liberty. You know, I would read that stuff and just be like, wow. And poetry, I'll tell you something, it did not really bloom in my head, so to speak, until I started memorizing big blocks of it and being able to read.
Mm,
You know, as an actor, that must resonate with you.
yeah. I mean Shakespeare, that was blew my mind, dude. Blew my mind. And again, one phrase at a time.
One
It's
phrase at a time.
one
Uh,
phrase at a time.
Sahar, thank you so much for being so active in the chat. I wish it were easier to see stuff for me, but so Sahar recommends avoid random thinking and try to put things in their suitable position. I mean, I can't argue with that. Sahar also says it
Hmm.
depends on the traits of the characters. The Black Knight likes poems. Oh, try months. Okay, let me see. Black Knight has some good stuff to say here. So Black Knight joins. He says we were
I
talking
think
about
Black
screen.
Knight said the 90-month novel. I think that was what the Black Knight was saying.
It's not. I don't know if it's
I
90 months. I may not. I may choose a different book.
might
But
choose a different
yeah.
path.
So screenwriting is different and yet similar. I think that's a good point. And try months, poems. Yeah, that's maybe something you might want to talk about as somebody with an acting background is the similarities and differences between screenwriting and writing prose.
Yeah, I mean, they're different and they're not, I mean, it's all capture the moment. That's all that it is. That's all that it is. And I like to say that, like using the medium, like use the form to tell it. The form tells the story. How you tell the story tells the story. And so whatever, I mean, screenwriting is certainly tighter. It's expected that you outline. Sometimes screenwriters actually write from somebody else's outline, which I think is insane. And super talented. I admire the hell out of people who can do that. Um, but
Where do
yeah,
we
I
find
think.
these outlines? Are they available somewhere online?
Oh no, I mean usually they're but I'm sure that you can find outlines specifically for TV shows, which typically have like writing teams.
And I
It's a
love Community,
team.
so I loved it when you said Dan Harmon.
Yeah. Yeah,
Community,
and
and that is such a great tight boom. Great story.
yeah. Well, and do you know the story circle?
I know that I can't tell you that I have it memorized, but I know it has 8 points and that it is
Uh,
very it's made Dan Harmon very successful. So I mean I want to try to do it.
well, it's the main thing. It's easier to actually show you on a paper because the really great thing about the story circle is that it has axes.
Hmm.
Okay, you need to go find something, take it or not, pay either way, and return changed. Is the story circle?
See that?
Um,
Okay, can you repeat that really slowly just because I think that that might make it more accessible to me.
here, let me do this.
You are so smooth with the lives, man. That was elegant.
So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You need to go find something, take it or not, pay either way, and return changed. But this is the
Why
real
doesn't he
magic.
explain it like that?
This he does. This is the real magic of it, okay? There are these two axes, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so in this front quadrant, you've got comfortable denial. You need to go into a stressful world, find something, you're still in denial, and when you take it or you don't, you face the ugly truth. Now you pay either way, and then you return to the comfortable world and you're changed.
Hmm.
This is this is the story circle. So you start in a comfortable place, but you're in denial. You go into a stressful place, something changes at 5, and then the stress increases, the stress increases, the stress increases. After the stress is over, what's changed?
Hmm.
And then I like my outlining method, I have a moment before and after that I call the framing images,
And this is what
asking,
you're talking about, where you have like kind of a common a light motif almost.
yeah, so like here we have an asking image and an answering image. So like if I would, do you know Three Sisters by Chekhov?
Um, I I couldn't tell you much about it. I know Chekhov and a little
No,
bit.
that's okay. So like it's a play about a fire. It's about a family who's living in the country and they keep on being like, "Oh, we're going to move to Moscow. We're going to move to Moscow." And then, at the end there's a big fire at their house and it ends with we're never going to Moscow. Um, and if I was to direct that as a film, I would say, all right, the opening image, the asking image, is going to be like a flower bed outside of their beautiful house. And the answering image is going to be that same flower bed after the fire. And that sets the tone, that sets the atmosphere. It's a frame. It's a frame for it. And I call them asking and answering because if you can make them echo each other or invert, or if you can literally have a question of like, what is this person going to be like? And then at the end, you see them, like we need to talk about Kevin is like that. You see this person who's super cruel, and what's he going to be like? And then at the end, you see exactly what he's going to be like. So that, yeah, the story circle is awesome. And like, that's the template
Do
that I
you have an
use.
article or something breaking this down, or would you consider writing one sometime? Because I found that tremendously useful.
Yeah, I've got like some YouTube videos, and at some point I'm gonna do like actually write it sort of into a book and then do an audiobook of it. But I
Mhm.
want to get some fiction out first because I don't want to be known as the story circle guy. I want to be known as a fantasy writer.
Yeah.
And so like I want to make things that people are interested in first. And then when people ask about it, I have plenty to talk about, obviously. I think about it a lot. But I want people to read the fantasy because that's the stuff that I'm proud of. That's where the poetry is. That's where I've poured my heart out. That's the story of my life in the form of a bunch of orcs, you know. So,
Well, I love it. I don't know. I mean, I don't want to monopolize your time, but I think that that might be a good place to end it. I've really enjoyed our conversation. I hope we can do it again sometime.
we should. I mean, I'd be down.
I definitely would be. I would love for you to maybe the next time we can have you do like a more in-depth like seminar on, and I know, well, I don't want to make you the story circle guy, but we can,
Well, no, let's talk about the outlining method like I
but
don't
let's
know
do
in
it
a
with
week or
like,
two.
you can show us how, like, okay, so not when Nala does this, it's this, right?
Yeah. I just rewrote a couple scenes and I have the story circle sort of ready for it. And it was the one that I'd sort of posted. And so like yeah, let's do that. I think the story should be out in like that chapter should be out in a week or two. And so
Yeah.
yeah, let's meet up. I'll track it down and we'll coordinate.
That's great. Sounds good. It was great to meet you face to face, so to speak. And thank you
Yeah.
so much. One more time, Anthony, plug yourself right after I do. My name is Sam Liebel. I'm the author of AFL the Bastard. That's my fantasy novel. Please go read it. If you click on my name, you'll find it right there. And Anthony's going to end it for us with his, where we can find out more about him.
If you go to anthonyleephillips.com, you can read about a girl who's an orc who makes friends with a boy who makes friends with a demon.
I love it. All right. Bye,
See you later,
everyone.
Sam.
Thank you so much for joining, everybody. Bye.